Hello, marvelous people. In my first 5 videos, I got some questions about quantum computing, so I figured I should make a video on this and just give a general description of quantum computing. And even though I've never done any quantum computing research, I have worked a lot with a laser scanning confocal microscope, so I do know a little bit about light and photons and wavelengths and different things associated uh, with quantum computing. So I think I can at least make a general list of things to talk about and just generally talk about them since people are interested. So in the 1940s, you had computers that used binary code to compute information, and these computers were big, they could take up a whole room, and you knew what binary code was stored just based off light bulbs. So for instance, if the light bulb was turned on, it would be holding a 1, and if it was off, it would be holding 0 in the binary code. So you had a lot of light bulbs that showed the binary code of this massive computer in a room, and it was pretty much like some modern day cheap calculators. And then in the 1960s, you got silicon microchips, so they could make these processing machines a lot smaller, and they still are used today. It's the ones we're more familiar with, the ones that are in the computer I'm using right now to make this video. And then in the 2000s, you had the invention of qubits, which use quantum information to store bits of information. So instead of binary code, you could actually have a superposition of possibilities in every bit of information. So instead of just a 1 or a 0, you could actually have anything in between or a combination of the ones and zeros if you want to think about it like that. So it drastically increased the computation of ability of just one bit of information. So during this video, I'm going to go over the 9 general ways that we're trying to use the quantum computing, the quantum nature of materials or light to compute information. And I'm also going to show a way that we can enhance it, which is kind of using something from nature, how biology computes information to help us optimize this computational ability of quantum qubits. So first, we can look at superconducting qubits, which are made by Josephson junctions, and that can be thought of as a superconductor sandwich. So it's a superconductor like aluminum that sandwiches an insulator, which could be aluminum oxide. And as you pass some electrons through the aluminum, that creates vibrations in the aluminum lattice. So the configuration of metal atoms are in a lattice structure, and that's what makes up the superconductor. And the vibrations that go through that lattice, those vibrations are called phonons, and that energy from the phonons gathers the electrons together to make a Cooper pair. And then when that Cooper pair goes through an insulating barrier, it can be used for quantum computing. And we'll come back to this later on. So you can also use ions like calcium, which naturally vibrate, or you can think of them, they naturally oscillate. So they're kind of easy to link together to form computations. And a laser, along with microwaves or radio frequencies, can be used to collect them together so you can use their collective vibrations for quantum computing. You can also use neutral atoms like rubidium and cesium, also excited by a laser, to compute information. And that can actually be done at room temperature, which makes it appealing. And the other thing that makes them appealing is that they're already arranged in a lattice. So these are just hypotheses that they haven't implemented this yet, but hypothetically, they could scale up and make a bigger and bigger lattice so more computations can be done on these types of quantum computers. And also the measurement is achieved through fluorescence. So the fluorescent signals that come from the atoms after you excite them is what you can actually read to understand what quantum computations did occur in the qubits. So you also have photonic qubits that use polarization and phase. So polarization is the electric field created by the photons, and then the phase you can think of it as the amplitude of the electric field, and both of those can be manipulated using beam splitters, phase shifters, and other optical components like emission filters, which enables quantum computing. They also have quantum dots, which use silicon spin qubits to compute information. So you have electrons stored in these little holes in the silicon, and the electron spin or oscillation can be used for quantum computing. And this is actually not used in any fractal or holographic way to increase the computation ability of many qubits because it's on a silicon substrate. But maybe they might think of some way to use it on another substrate which would be scalable. You also have nitrogen vacancy centers in diamond. I think this is interesting because it uses a diamond lattice. So if we can figure out how to precisely make the vacancy, which is a defect in the diamond lattice, I think that it can really be scalable because we can make it in fractal patterns and three-dimensional geometries that'll increase the collective vibration of many qubits so more qubits can be used for computing. So it actually uses nitrogen atoms inside the diamond lattice, which are right next to a vacancy, which is made by a defect in the diamond. And that defect in the diamond leaves room for an electron to be localized. So that electron can actually be, the oscillation of that electron can be used to do computations along with the nucleus of the nitrogen atom. So they can both kind of be used for quantum computation. So you can also have topological qubits, which are made from quasi-particles. And these quasi-particles you can think of as an electron separated between two nuclei or two fermions, so that whenever it's separated, it's almost like braided in a certain structure where you have one half of the electron here and the other half of the electron over there, so that they're connecting two atoms. And that's a good way to store information because how they're braided is structurally consistent from one atom to the next, so that even if you lose information on one part of the qubit, it's still stored on the other. So you also have quantum annealers, which are mainly just used for optimization computations, but maybe if they scale them up, they might be able to be used for more things. So previously I talked about Josephson junctions, and this would be kind of a graph or a framework or a lattice of Josephson junctions connected together to perform computations, which uses the Cooper pairs that I talked about recently in the video. So next you have nuclear magnetic resonance, which uses hydrogen 1 or carbon 13, the nuclear spin of those atoms, in order to do quantum computations using nuclear magnetic resonance. And that this isn't really scalable, no fractal or holographic architecture, just because of the machine that you have to use to do this, to do the radio frequency pulses. So one way they can do error correction, I think, would be implementing lattice frameworks, which are also seen in biology, or fractal frameworks, which I think will enhance holographic information processing, which will increase the accuracy of the system via error correction. So a simpler way you can think about it is that holographic error correction would be delocalized and propagated through the whole lattice, so that in the center of the lattice you have the logical information, and it gets computed to further boundaries of the lattice, which could also compute information from other qubits. But then if you have an error that happens, it can just go back to smaller layers in the structure until it gets to a layer that still has the logical information, and figure out where that error occurred, so that error correction could be utilized. And I think this is a framework that you can implement more and more qubits, that all the different types of quantum computing that I talked about in this video could do research on. And many of them, as I showed on the PowerPoint, if you want to go through and read it, many of them are looking into that. So the take home for this video, I think, is peering into machines help us peer into ourselves, because we already know that nature has a lot of quantum computation, such as photosynthesis and bird navigation. And I'm sure in the upcoming decades, we'll figure out that evolution has harnessed quantum computations in many different tissues in humans as well. And what we can take from nature that will actually enhance these quantum computations is the fractal lattice pattern that nature uses throughout tissues and throughout all of biology, which recent papers have shown that holographic superradiance of aromatic residues aligned by phase separation, a certain phase of water that's more structured than aqueous water, but not totally rigid like ice, is actually key to quantum biology. So it's taken this lattice structure, this three-dimensional fractal structure, in order to increase information transfer and increase fidelity of computations that are happening in biological tissues. So thank you, marvelous people, and have a wonderful day.